Present Erik. Erik. Erik.
All right, good morning, everybody. If you're wondering what I do at Colonial Williamsburg when it comes to brass mounts on Brown Besses, I call it brass. I kind of take the chicken poop way out because its creator, the Board of Ordnance called it brass. I'm sticking with brass. So, okay. So I'm going to jump into something that's a little bit personal. It kind of goes back to, I don't know, what my pathetic life was like in the late 1980s, where I was doing a whole heck of a lot of Revolutionary War reenacting. Yeah, that's me as a blonde. I don't know if I'm really pulling it off. What do you think, Joel? No, it's not working. I'm not fooling anybody. But at the time, I was doing a heck of a lot of Revolutionary War reenacting as part of the 23rd Regiment of Foot, Royal Welsh Fusiliers. And at that time, Colonial Williamsburg was like a mecca for reenactors. They would have these various events. People would come into town, and there would be 600 or 700 or 800 uniformed Revolutionary War soldiers about town in an era where CW was getting something close to 1 million paid visitors a year. So it was pretty crowded. And when I went up into the powder magazine, which used to look like this, you could get right up to the muskets, and you could see all the engraving on the lock. You could see what was marked on the barrel. You could also steal yourself a top jaw screw or a sling swivel, and that happened a lot. And I think it's basically because of this setup. Guests were allowed to get right up close. And I noticed they had quite a few Longland muskets marked to the 23rd Welsh Fusiliers. That was my unit. Wow, these things were phenomenal, and they had good early dates on the lock plates. So I began asking around, like, hey, where did all these muskets come from? Back then, nobody knew. So I asked, they used to call themselves mag rats, the military program staff that, worked out of the powder magazine, and I got some great stories. One of my favorite story was the Welsh Fusilier arms are the ones that were actually captured from the regiment at Yorktown, and they just brought them into Williamsburg. And another one was even a little sillier, where I think I was told, well, they're all reproductions made for a Victorian extravaganza. I was like, either way, I decided, maybe I'll start looking into this. And I started doing a little bit of research. I started recording details about the arms themselves. And it led to this book, which came out in 2002, 18th Century Weapons of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers from Flixton Hall. And I think that book pretty much got me the job at Colonial Williamsburg, which I started, maybe 6 months after the book came out. And just recently, I wrote sort of a review of what I have learned about the arms from Flixton Hall since then, because I don't let anything go. So, I became so interested in this place. I made 2 trips to visit the site, made trips to the Suffolk Record Office in Lowestoft, England, and it's in my DNA. So I never stop looking to add to this database. So a 22-year redux was in order, and this article just came out, Man at Arms magazine, I think in the February issue. So I figured it'd be a good topic for this group because we can really take a deep dive into an amazing group of Brown Bess muskets. Now, the collection we have at Colonial Williamsburg, we got kind of by really good luck. We knew there were muskets in the powder magazine, of course. It's basically a musket house. We knew there were muskets on the walls of the governor's palace, and since we had both of these buildings, we wanted to furnish them with appropriate muskets, so we just went out and bought them. We bought them wherever we could find them. Occasionally we got them in 1s and 2s, but more often than not we'd buy 10 at a time, 20 at a time, or even 50 at a time. So by the time we get to the 1960s, we've got hundreds of Brown Bess muskets on hand. But getting back to the Flixton Hall group, they really were an outlier. And the Rosetta Stone came out of Colonial Williamsburg's files. Even though it's not firearm related, it relates to one of the swords of the Welsh Fusiliers that came out of the same house And you can see just that little note, purchased from Sir A. Adair, Flixton, Suffolk, the 10th of, the 10th. Wait, that's British. That's the 10th of December, 1950, 10 pounds for the sword. Purchased from Sir A. Adair. Well, wow. Anybody recognize W. Keith Neal over here in this photograph? We bought lots and lots of stuff from him. Keith Neal was probably, I guess you could say he was probably the greatest gun collector who ever lived. He had more money than God. He could buy whatever he wanted. He kept all of his firearms in pristine condition, and he actually shot them all. He was one of those sorts. Keith Neal died in probably the late 1980s, and unfortunately, at least from what his family has told me, he never kept any records. So there are always going to be some questions I'm going to have about, what went down at Flixton Hall that, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to answer. So, Sir A. Adair, Flixton, Suffolk. It was pretty quick to get to this place. This is Flixton Hall, and this is William Adair. Flixton Hall was originally built around 1610, supposedly in the Elizabethan E style of manor house, and there's some thought that it may have been designed by Inigo Jones. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not an architectural historian. But as you can see, it's an absolutely amazing structure. And these views follow it from how it looked in 1752 when Paul Sandby did a watercolor of it, all the way through some photographs that were taken earlier in the 20th century. Now, why were arms of the Welsh Fusiliers at Flixton Hall? Because of this guy, William Adair. William Adair made a living as an army agent. He was basically the business manager for a particular British regiment. Or if he was active enough, he could be the business manager for 10 British regiments, like John Calcraft was, at this time period. Became a very, very successful man. He was also the prize agent for Lord Anson, who took tremendous hauls of Spanish treasure on the high seas in the 1740s. He'd get a share of that. So in 1753, William Adair, with his newfound riches as an army agent and a prize agent, purchases Flixton Hall from the Tasborough family, and he starts decorating his home. And that's how this arms display comes to be in Flixton Hall and how it comes to descend through the Adair family. First, I have some gratuitous images. World War II. The 446th Bomb Group, which was a heavy bombardment squadron of B-24s, was actually stationed on the grounds of the mansion. And in fact, this is my favorite photograph of it. You can see the mansion up there, that blue arrow, but it's so cool that it's framed by the number 3 and number 4 engines of a B-24 bomber. So this was actually snapped by a co-pilot who had just taken off, and I got this photograph directly from this gentleman who's now since passed on. And the other 3 shots show a bunch of airmen from the 446 Bomb Group who weren't supposed to be on the grounds of the mansion that close, but they would sneak in to get photographs of, this amazing castle, as they called it. And, the one in the center is the only known original color photograph taken of the hall by also a 446 Bomb Group ground pounder, one of the ground echelon, a guy named Albert Craftsman, who ran around Suffolk, England with an American camera and plenty of Kodachrome film. So he took some really amazing early color photographs of Great Britain. Also relating to World War II is this guy. This is the Sir A. Adair that sold all the arms from the mansion to Keith Neal. Kind of an important guy. Crossing of the Rhine. This man was the commanding officer of the Guards Armored Division in World War II. So he was at the Normandy breakout. He was at the crossing of the Rhine. He was at some really important battles. Anybody seen A Bridge Too Far? There's one scene where I think maybe it's Michael Caine. He goes by a tank and says, "Good morning, Alan." That's Adair. He was that kind of guy. So the sad part about Adair is right after World War II, he retires from the Army. His father passes away. He inherits Flixton Hall, almost 3,000 acres of tenant farms, this mansion he describes as a vast, uncomfortable mausoleum, and he can't afford to keep it. Because at this time period, Britain changed their death duty laws to sort of shift a heavy, heavy financial burden onto the upper class to actually pay for, the damage done by the Luftwaffe to Britain and her economy. So he couldn't afford to keep the mansion, and he decided to sell off the mansion and everything in it. And that's why this stuff came on the market. So in late 1950, General Adair gets in touch with Keith Neal. Keith Neal makes the trip. He drives the 200 miles from his home in Wiltshire, and he basically buys all of the arms in the mansion. Excuse me. Then he very hurriedly writes to Minor Wine Thomas at Colonial Williamsburg, who was then a curator, and he was very actively trying to fill the powder magazine. And Keith Neal writes this wonderful letter that we have in our files. It says, now at last I can report some good news regarding some of the items you still need for the armory, meaning the powder magazine. I have just succeeded in buying a most remarkable family collection of arms. There are also a few of the rare early dated muskets as supplied to the guards with 46-inch barrels and have the contractor's names such as Jordan, G.R. Tower, and the name of the regiment engraved on the barrels such as Royal Welsh Fusiliers. They are the only stand of these arms I have ever been able to acquire. They've been in the possession of the family from whom I purchased them ever since their days of their use, and have only been sold to me because the mansion has to be sold to pay death duties. The family have been associated with the Grenadier Guards for an unbroken succession of many generations, and this accounts for their preservation of these arms. That's total hokum. That is not true. That's Keith Neal's assumption. All of these arms are hanging in the long gallery very high up, and until I have got them down, I cannot send you full details, but there will be about 20 infantry swords of the 1740 to 1760 period, which I think is just what you want. I am making arrangements to fetch the rest in the course of the next 10 days. I am most excited at getting this collection, which I regard as one of the most important I have ever had the good fortune to acquire. Now, I dare say if they bubbled to the market today, Jonathan would probably swoop in and we wouldn't get an export license. Yeah, well, that's a good point. So anyway, there were some non-Royal Welsh Fusilier marked muskets that supposedly came out of Flixton Hall. 22 years after the book came out, I have some doubts because I have, as I've looked very closely at how Keith Neal handled military firearms, he got a little sloppy. So he may have included stuff he had sitting around to put together an attractive package deal of 20 muskets to sell to the foundation. So we're going to talk about, just the Welsh Fusilier marked arms. At this point, I can trace 29 Longland muskets, 46-inch barreled muskets. That include the pattern 1730 and the transitional pattern 1730/40, which DeWitt gave it its own pattern designation. I don't really know if it's necessary, but it is different from a pattern 1730, and we'll look at that in a minute. The very rare pattern 1748, and of course the pattern 1756, which is a novel design for a firearm at the time they were acquired by Adair, but would become the workhorse musket of the early part of the American Revolution. So we're going to start with the pattern 1730s, and this is a key firearm, mostly because it's considered the first standard British military firearm of any sort, leading up to whatever it is the British Army is carrying now. This is its direct ancestor. The Board of Ordnance had learned, the lessons in the Marlborough War, where we had a system of proprietary colonelship these individual regiments were free to acquire whatever sort of firearm in whatever caliber of whatever quality they would buy. And it was problematic because Regiment A is next to Regiment B in combat, and guess what? They don't have interchangeable ammunition. It's a problem. The quality was all over the place, so the Board of Ordnance began standardizing arms, or starting to standardize arms in the 1720s. Around 1727, 1726, they start stockpiling individual parts. Like, this is our pattern lock. We're going to buy these locks from these lock makers. They're going to be of the highest quality. They did the same thing with all the components, and they were gathering together, these, what eventually would be issued out as gun kits over the next decade, starting in the 1730s. Up on screen here are some of the details that identify the pattern 1730 that I think are probably its sexiest features. It's designated by, very faint relief carving around the lock mortise, the side plate flat, ending at the trigger guard, and of course going around the barrel tang. It's got a simple single bow trigger guard, and it's got a system of double pins, or I should say double tabs. So it's a really cool, ingenious thing, and Stuart Mowbray and I had fun pulling one of these muskets apart where we put the musket back together without the stock, so you could see that on this, the second down rammer pipe, the pin goes through one barrel loop, the loop of the rammer pipe, and then through yet another barrel loop that, sort of bookends the tab end of the rammer pipe and on through. It's an exceptionally fussy thing. Unless you're a Prussian, in which case, 12 of these is just fine. I say that for anybody who's ever pulled apart a Potsdam Magaz musket. Anybody ever try? 12 of these things. Anyway, but I digress. So that is one of the features of the pattern 1730. The pattern 1730-40, which again, I don't really know if it's its own pattern, because there's evidence from this particular group of arms that pattern 1730s and pattern 1730-40s were issued to even the same company in the same regiment, in the 23rd Fusiliers. The pattern 1730-40, sometimes they have raised carving around the lock, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have the double loop system of barrel retention. Sometimes they have a bridled pan, which is an improvement above the pattern 1730. Which one is the trigger on the bottom? That? Whoa. Thanks, Danny. Oh, this thing. Is that? Yeah. This has got the bridled pan, which is an improvement that really makes the flintlock fire quicker. So that was a really major development that comes about right around 1740. And of course, a new trigger guard. See the old one, with the single bow? It's replaced by a much more substantial split end bow. And because we could do it, we took a trigger guard, an early pattern 1730 trigger guard, and the common post 1742 trigger guard, and we threw them on the scale. Yeah, 33% heavier. So they really beefed that up because, well, you don't want a trigger guard that's going to bust in combat. And also, it's interesting to point out that all of these wooden rammered guns from Flixton have had a noseband put on the end of the stock. That is a regimental addition because when these were issued out of the Tower, London, they would not have had that feature. They probably should have had that feature, and the Board of Arms figured that out pretty quickly when they went to this. The pattern 1748, which is the first British firearm to have been built with a steel rammer. Pretty novel invention. You can see it sort of has the look of the earlier muskets. These all have the bridle pan. They have dates, obviously, after 1740. They have 3 equal rammer pipes, but this time they've also added a cast brass nose cap. So this is a really interesting development. You will probably not see a pattern 1748 in the wild. Other than the ones from Flixton Hall, I've seen 1 or 2. Production figures were super, super low. I think maybe around 8,000 of them were made. So, but Britain was moving in the right direction and taking us right up to the pattern 1756, which has a new style lock. The bottom of the lock plate is now straight. Still got the bridle, but instead of having 3 equal rammer pipes, they introduced the long trumpet pipe. And again, the pattern 1756 is, such a workhorse musket. Production figures are probably north of $250,000. in the years that it was made in the 1750s and 1760s. So we've got all these wonderful arms from Flixton Hall, and these weapons they're absolutely stunning in condition. Would you agree, Isabel? They're pretty good, yeah. Well, they were on the walls of a mansion forever. So how did this happen, you know? I mean, it's pretty simple. William Adair was the business manager for the regiment. He took over, he became the manager of the regiment in 1743 when Colonel Piers was killed at the Battle of Dettingen. And that's when Adair gets I guess you could say, the agency of the regiment. And when he acquires Flixton Hall, I'm assuming he either purloined or purchased the muskets that he wanted to use to decorate his mansion. He'd be the perfect person to do it, and all he would have to do is make sure he didn't owe the crown any money for the muskets that he acquired. Sad part is we have no documentation to prove any of this. But there's still a lot we can learn about the issues of these arms just by looking at their markings. And I dedicated a good amount of time to trying to decipher those. So first we're going to look at the patterns 1730 and pattern 1740. In this group you can see there are, 9 muskets? I've got them divided into 3 groups based on markings. So when were the issues of this type of arm sent out to the Welsh Fusiliers? Well, we know that after the ordnance system comes into play, the British Army set out on a campaign to sort of rearm the entire army with these stockpiled pattern muskets that were coming in the store at the Tower of London. And we know that there are 4 arms issues to the Welsh Fusiliers, roughly that coincide with this time period. In July of 1739, 100 muskets and bayonets were sent to the regiment for an augmentation. New company was added, so 110 muskets went to the unit. In July of 1741, a new set of 620 muskets were sent to equip the old regular companies of the Royal Welsh, not the new augmented company that had just received the new arms in 1739. In 1745, there was another augmentation, and another 146 muskets and bayonets went to the Welsh Fusiliers. And here's another very interesting thing. In November of 1745, a complete new set of 726 muskets and bayonets were sent because the regiment lost everything at the Siege of Ghent in 1745. I think that was July of 1745. So we have a really convenient documentary trail to show when these arms were issued. So here are the 3 markings-based groups. As you can see, there are 3 distinct groups. And one of the first things that we could figure out is that, well, these were not markings applied at the Tower of London. How do we know that? Because the Tower of London did not employ engravers until after this time period. So any of these sort of unit markings that you see were applied at the regimental level. And we've got 3 distinct groups. The first one, if you look at the font, for lack of a better term, all capitals, with the first letter of each word a little bit bigger. Group 2, all capitals, all the letters are the same size. And group 3, all capitals, all the same size. But instead of just saying Royal Welsh, it spells out the entire name, Royal Welsh Fusiliers, and this is in a tiny, tiny little font. So there are also differentiations in how the company and weapon number designations are engraved into the wrist plate and also the butt plate tang, because you can't have anything unmarked at this time period, apparently. This is actually very convenient to have the names of the company commanders engraved into the butt plate. This seems to have fallen out of fashion by the French and Indian War. It's just a lot of extra work that's not necessarily needed. And if that wasn't enough, some of the muskets have brands, hot brands, burned into the wood, listing the initials of the colonels, of the company commanders. So Oh, I'm on the wrong page here. The earliest. So how do we start dating these a little bit tighter? Probably the first one, the most important one, is up top. Major Lort. That's Major Roger Lort, who became major in 1742, and he was killed in combat at the Battle of Fontenoy in May of 1745. So we know, without a doubt, that musket was with his company before that date. If you're not, anybody familiar with the Battle of Fontenoy? I know you are. It was a whopper of a battle. The casualty count combined was pretty close to 20,000 killed and wounded. It was considered, one of the biggest, probably the biggest European battle fought in the middle part of the 18th century. Until the 7 Years' War, of course. This famous painting depicts an event where there was a little bit of an egotistical gentleman's standoff between the French guards and the commanding officer of the British 1st Regiment of Foot Guards, where they were daring each other to fire first. And basically, the French did fire first. It looked like the British were going to win the battle, but they snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, and the French won the day. But poor old Major Lort, he bit it. And this is his monument in the church in Tenby, South Wales. But getting back to Major Lort's musket, that's our first good clue. The Group 2 muskets, we know would have been issued between marked in April 1741 to May of 1745, because that's when, based on Taylor, Taylor's name is not up here. The Taylor musket is one of the other muskets we have at Colonial Williamsburg. Captain Taylor was promoted at that date, and also one of the Major Hickman muskets, he was promoted to major in May of 1745. So we're getting a little bit tighter with these things. Now we also know that Group 3 is the earliest, because we have something interesting going on here, and this is where, paying attention to these engraved markings will yield something. If you look at this engraving on the butt plate, notice how the font used for the word captain is clearly, and it's clearly engraved by a different hand. Can you see that? Because this looks a heck of a lot like Group 1, doesn't it? And this captain, it's tiny, matches the engraving on the barrel. So that tells me that previously there was another captain's name here. Conveniently, in April of 1742, Captain Henry Hickman retires, leaves the Army. Captain Bernard takes over his company. So what we can do now is, we now know that this marking predates the time in April of 1742 when Captain Bernard takes over Captain Hickman's company, and we also know that engraving would have been applied in Britain because the regiment hadn't yet left for the continent. So we're getting a little closer. And of course we know that all of these markings predate May of 1745, also just because, the regiment loses all their muskets and bayonets. So, we know these arms represent the arms issues of 1739 to 1741, and as such, they would have been present at the Battle of Dettingen, they would have been at Fontenoy, but somehow or another, they weren't with the regiment when they lost all their arms at Ghent in 1745. Well, if they were, William Adair wouldn't have gotten them. So my guess is these were arms that, for one reason or another, were not in the field that day. Maybe they were in store, maybe they were back in camp. I don't know. But they did survive long enough to sort of make it into the 1750s and become the property of William Adair. So I'm assuming that when a new set of arms was issued to the regiment, when they came home in 1745, these would have been old, and they were just acquired for Flixton at that point. The arms issues of 1756 and 57, these are the more modern muskets. These are the ones with the steel rammers. And these arms issues include 9 examples of the pattern 1748, and 11 examples of the pattern 1756. Interesting phenomenon goes on here. Right at this time period, the regiment needs a new set of arms because the 1st Battalion of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers is about to be sent to the continent because the 7 Years' War is raging. And, you know, first-run arms are always sent to the regiments that are going into the most important theater of war, which at this time is going to be in Germany. So let's look at the pattern 1756 muskets first. Here is my chart that lists the lock maker's marks. They're all dated 1756 with one exception. And the bayonets and the rammers are also engraved with matching company and weapon numbers. So you can see there's a lot of dashes, like musket number 472, yes, we know where the bayonet is and we know where the rammer is. And then if you go down weapon number 7/72, well, we don't know where the bayonet is, we don't know where the lock plate is, but we know where the bayonet is, or the rammer. So there's a lot of missing components from this arms group. It's one of the things that drives me nuts. But you can see here, you can see part of the weapon number 71, company 5, number 73, company 5 over 94. Now, there was a supplementary issue to the 1st Battalion Royal Welsh Fusiliers in September 57 because they were augmented. So they got more companies, so they needed more muskets. Excuse me, the individual companies were expanded. They went from being composed of 73 men to being composed of 100 men, so the Board of Ordnance issued extra muskets. And the interesting thing is, you notice all the weapon numbers are 71, 72, or 73. Those are extra muskets. There weren't actually 73 men needed, there were only 70 men, because the first 3 men in the arms sequences tended to be the sergeants. So these muskets were deliberate extras that were issued to the regiment, but instead of going to the regiment, William Adair got them for his place. Okay, hey, it's good to be the Army agent, right? And the same thing with the 1757 issue. They picked up where the numbering system left off, 94, 95, 96, 3 contingent men. So this is this is just a cheesecake shot. You know, how often do you see mint condition, kind of unissued Brown Bess bayonets from the middle 1750s that are still together and sequentially numbered? So, and I like to point out, like, you know, while these, you know, were issued by the Board of Ordnance and they went pretty much straight to Flixton Hall's walls, their brothers, you know, bayonet number 52 and bayonet number 34, those are the ones that saw action on the continent. Okay, now we're going to move on to the pattern 1748s. Interesting, why are pattern 1748s a slightly obsolete arm going to a prominent regiment like the Welsh Fusiliers? It's simple. At the same time period, they added a 2nd battalion. So the 2nd battalion was forming at home. They were essentially a brand new regiment, even though they were part of the Welsh Fusiliers. So they didn't necessarily need the best cutting edge arm. They still got good stuff. They were given the pattern 1748s. So it's an easy way to tell which battalion of the Royal Welsh, got what. And the company numbers start at 11. So this is one of my favorite things at Colonial Williamsburg. We've got musket 1773, the bayonet, and the rammer. It just doesn't get any better. Right, Isabel? This is pretty sweet, yeah. So, let me just make sure I didn't miss anything here. There's a lot of, like I say, this gets really into the weeds. And I want to make sure I'm not confusing the heck out of everybody. Is everybody confused? You're supposed to be confused, huh? This is not the kind of lecture I could ever give at work, because the people who come to the museum would not care. Absolutely not. So looking at the known corpus of muskets, bayonets, and rammers for the for the 2nd Battalion Royal Welsh, you can see there are a lot of holes. Oh, Joel. Stuart Mowbray or Colonial Williamsburg? No. Our guy's good. He's not as good as Mowbray. Don't tell Jason I said that. Okay. So look at all the dashes in this chart. Why are these arms missing? I think I might have an explanation. Flixton Hall had a disastrous fire during a period of extensive renovation in 1847. So it's possible that a significant portion of the original assemblage formed by William Adair to decorate the mansion went up in flames. We'll probably never know. But, God, isn't that a heartbreaking painting? It was rebuilt, obviously. Here's another cheesecake shot. This is 20 of the 21 known Flixton Hall bayonets. It's beautiful, isn't it? And, in case it's not enough for you, here's another one. Yeah, this is kind of like modern art, isn't it? I have a poster-sized print of this hanging up in my office. So where to go to next? I mean, I've always got these burning questions. I want to know more about Flixton Hall. I want to locate more of the missing pieces that theoretically should exist. Missing rack numbers. I hate that term, but you know what I mean when I say rack numbers. So I'm constantly looking, Another one of the things that has frustrated me is the fact that Keith Neal, he was a great photographer. He could have photographed the arms before he sent them to Colonial Williamsburg. He didn't. He didn't take notes. I guess these things were, let's face it, I mean, he was selling these to Colonial Williamsburg for 20 pounds a piece. That's about $80 in 1951 dollars when we bought these things. But he never recorded what was there. So, one of the things that I never stopped doing is looking for pictures of Flixton Hall. When the book came out, the only image I found that showed one of the arms of the Welsh Fusiliers was this 1907 shot that shows the hanger. One of the hangers crossed with its scabbard above an arch. We've got 25 of them. One we traded to George Newman and is now in the Valley Forge collection, and the other one was stolen in 1967 from the Powder magazine. So I'm hoping one day that will show up. William and Mary kids. I'm not kidding. It was a big problem back then. Frat pranks. Go steal a sword from the Powder magazine. So anyway, I keep on looking and looking and looking. And one of the things that really encourages me is the fact that Flixton Hall was a popular enough place that local photographers took photographs there, stamped the back, and created, what collectors now call real photo postcards. And on screen are a bunch of postcards that I have acquired over the years through the magic of eBay. And I'm thinking, somebody at some point must have snapped a shot that showed the muskets, and that finally showed up early last year. So there we go. Yay! I was kind of like elated because it's a dream come true. I've wanted this photograph since the mid-1990s. So in my mind, it's going to be something grand. It's going to be something. No, it's kind of common arsenal display. Now, I know it's on the other side of the hall, so I know there's not a musket rack there, but I don't know what else is in the mansion. But what I can glean from this is that you can see the muskets are stored upright. You can see, I think that's probably the top of the cock or maybe the face of the steel. But you can see that the barrels are facing out. And you can also see that the wide blade of the bayonet is also facing out. So it's physically impossible to fix a musket on a bayonet and have it show that way. So the bayonets are sort of racked differently than the muskets. And it looks like the muskets are in there. I can count 4 bays of 8 muskets. So that tells me there are at least 32 muskets out there, which is kind of close to the 29 that I can trace. So there's still hope, more stuff will come to light. Now, Flixton Hall, as I said, was sold off. You can see right after Keith Neal came and bought most of the arms, because there were some arms that were listed in his catalog, mostly swords I have no idea what they are because they were not illustrated, but the place was, stripped bare, and then it was sold, and then this happened. Yeah, architectural vandalism. If you ever want to cry, look up a book called The Destruction of the Country House. It lists 1,200 of these properties that were pulled down in Britain from the late 19th century through about 1960. So Flixton Hall was sold to a fellow who decided to, the sum of the parts was greater than the whole, so he immediately stripped off the roof lead to sell. What happens when you have no metal on your roof? It leaks. Well, it's getting damaged. I guess I have to pull it down now. So Flixton Hall was pulled down to the first floor. This, believe it, this is the same view. 1753, 2000. I snapped that shot. It was converted for agricultural uses, they say. So it's a farm shed. There are big bags, industrial-sized bags of fertilizer in what was once the Great Hall, and what it was once the billiard room had a cow that had just given birth. So it's just what happened. But I think I'll end on a happy note by showing you what we've done with most of the Flixton Hall arms. They are in a very suitable location. Most of them, except for the ones that we have pulled back for study, now reside above the fireplace in the governor's mansion, the governor's palace. So I think it's a little bit of a redemption, maybe. I don't know. So anyway, that's it in a nutshell. I think I've stunned you guys all into a coma. So I'm happy to answer any questions. John.
Am I losing my mind? Do we not have rack number 19/23, which was missing on your list?
It's 19 over 23?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be 23, though. It's not a contingent man number. 19 over 73.
Sorry, 73. Brain fart.
You do have one of the muskets, yeah.
Yeah. It appeared on your chart
It didn't.
as, I read it as not extant, and you talked about them getting burned. I may have lost the plot here.
Oh, wait, you said 19.
1973. Yeah.
No, I don't have it. I have the rammer down. Wait, you have a pattern 1748? You have a pattern 56, it's not 19. Okay. Yeah. Oh, mathematics, stats, any of that crap, anything that looks like a spreadsheet, I suck at. So Mowbray went nuts laying this out and making sure it was correct. Yeah, you do have a pattern 56, but well,
The number recorded is definitely 19.
I think yours might be 573, or maybe 1071. I think yours is a Grice, or it's got a Grice lock in it.
Sorry, I'm taking up the time here. It's definitely Grice. It's definitely 756, but we have it down as 19/73. 73? What is
19/73?
Yeah.
Uh,
Check that when I get back to the ranch. Because it's probably wrong.
Grice. It might be 573 because that's a Grice, and it's the only Grice that's numbered 73.
I'll check.
And I know I didn't, at least I don't believe I missed it. It's very possible that I missed it, but
Check for you.
I don't think I did. Because there's, other than Colonial Williamsburg, there's two in private hands. The National Army Museum has one of the pattern 1730s. The Regimental Museum of the Welsh Fusiliers has got one with the block from the one that's at Warminster. And where is there another one? Valley Forge has got one. So there's not a lot of them.
So the Captain Bernard butt plate, you were talking about
Yeah.
how you were thinking that there was another individual's name there. Is
Yeah.
there any evidence, like is there a swale in the brass where it's been polished away to get down? Because, you clearly can't see that there was another name engraved over it. So I'm just wondering, because to me, logically, I would say that Bernard was there and then Captain was added, or the other way around, that Captain was added and they waited to put a captain's name there. It just, from an engraving standpoint, it just doesn't look like one name has been polished away. Like, is there a dip in the metal to show evidence of a
We
name?
can go back and look, because I have access to both of them.
I'd just be
So-
really curious to know.
Well, the reason I would say that there was another name there, because this engraving was probably done by this guy. And this guy wouldn't have done, if this guy was doing, the first run of engraving, all of it would look like that. So it would be a Group 1 musket. But I'd also add that the Group 3 muskets, the engraving is very, very shallow. So
Okay.
it wouldn't be too difficult to remove that.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's worth going back to look.
Yeah, I'm just curious because it kind of boggles my mind that it wouldn't show some indication of the name having been removed. So, thanks, Eric.
It should be there. But, it should. I mean, to really tell, I mean, it's possible that if you're removing engraving, yeah, you will leave a noticeable divot. Yeah. But you can also hammer it from the opposite side and push the metal back out. So,
So that we need to look at the underside of the
it would be if we can get the butt plates out, because on these muskets, remember, Isabel, they're pinned in, and we try not to remove butt plates if they're in there tight. Do you want to hit him? You can hit him.
Just use a saw.
Getting close? Okay. But, yeah, we can definitely look closer at it and see.
The names are mentioned of the captains. Does that mean that they are personally responsible for these guns?
I think it means that this musket belongs to this company, and yes, they are personally responsible.
So they have to pay if they
Yep.
break it, or. And another question: is there a reason why they changed from the name Royal Welsh to the emblem of the Royal Welsh?
Probably, because these muskets were all engraved at the regimental or even company level, so they would have been done by the regiment, for the regiment. We know in the case of, the Group 3 muskets, they were engraved while the regiment was still in England somewhere. But we can probably state that the other groups may well have been engraved while the regiment was on campaign in the continent. So they would have been done by a regimental armorer or armorers working in the field. But this type of marking, this was done by the Board of Ordnance, who by this point was issuing muskets out with regimental markings already on them, as done at the tower in as you can see, a very professional manner. This is standardized, yeah. And I have a tattoo of that on my leg because I'm that kind of geek. So, oh, you've seen it when I wear shorts. Yeah. So.
On the chart that you have earlier of the various different ones, there's a few where you just have the ramrod. Are those associated with a particular gun, or are they just disassociated ramrods that you've come across? How are you able to
They're
attribute those?
disassociated ramrods.
Interesting.
Which theoretically doesn't make sense, and the only way I can, when they were issued from the Tower of London and they were acquired by William Adair, they should have been brand new sets of arms in crates packed sequentially, and they're all mixed up. They wouldn't have left the Tower of London mixed up, so it's possible sometime before 1847, people cleaning the mansion, pulled all the guns down, cleaned them all up, put them back together willy-nilly, and then some that were in this room and some were on that wall, some survived, some didn't. So I think that's reasonably, it suggests that it's very possible that a substantial portion of the collection that existed in 1758 was gone in 1847.
So the way that they came into Williamsburg and that you have them now, you have guns with rammers that don't match the rest
Yes.
of the. Okay,
Yes.
interesting.
In fact, the gun that is at Warminster, we have the rammer for it. So, yeah. One of the pattern 1756s came with a rammer that went to Colonial Williamsburg's gun, one of Colonial Williamsburg's guns. And Colonial Williamsburg had the rammer 594 that went to that musket, and a swap was arranged. So everybody got to complete their own stand of arms.
Is this the biggest set of regimentally marked arms?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's so exciting. It's a great regiment. It's a very interesting time period. and these arms are in beautiful condition. I mean, you know, we know the pattern 1730s and 3040s, they were issued, they were used in the field, and they show it. But the pattern 56s and pattern 1748s show age, and any use that they show is from us, using them in the 50s, you know, so. Yeah, but it's, I mean, to me, they're, without a doubt, they are the benchmark group of longland pattern muskets. So, right, Joel?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Anything else? Other questions? Okay. Thank you for listening to me.